The field was silent, until the sound of heavy footsteps broke through the fog. The warrior advanced with his axe raised, not an ordinary axe, but a blade so wide it seemed capable of splitting the world itself. The enemy barely had time to understand what was before him. A single blow, an impact that echoed like thunder. The shield split open like rotten wood. The helmet bent as if it were made of clay, and the body fell before the blood even touched the ground. This was just one of the 20 deadliest Viking axes ever forged in the Dark Ages. When we think of Vikings, we imagine ships cutting through icy seas, rounded shields clashing in unison, and warriors charging under the roar of a furious god. But there is one symbol that surpasses all others, a tool of labor transformed into an ultimate weapon of destruction, the Viking axe. Unlike swords, which were expensive and rare, the axe was common. Every free man owned one, and that made the Viking axe not just a tool, but an extension of the Norse warrior himself. But don't be fooled. We're not talking about ordinary lumberjacks' axes. The Vikings revolutionized their weapons with designs that defied logic and cruelty. Deep bearded axes capable of pulling shields, elongated blades for amputating limbs, thin heads that cracked helmets like shells, and versions so light they could be thrown with deadly accuracy. In the right hand, a Viking axe was faster than a sword, more brutal than a club, and more efficient than many weapons of the time. It was the perfect combination of simplicity, lethality, and adaptability. A weapon that didn't need to be beautiful to be respected. In the frozen fields of England, in the forests of Scandinavia, in the looted villages of Europe, these axes left scars on history. And today we're going to explore the 20 deadliest of all time. Each one with a function, a purpose, and a reputation that terrified any enemy who dared to stand in their way. If you thought an axe was just a piece of iron attached to a handle, get ready to change everything you know. The Vikings didn't just use axes, they transformed axes into deadly art. If you love historical weapons, real brutality, and raw warfare, subscribe to Blades and Shadows right now. Your light keeps our brotherhood alive and helps us bring you more chilling stories straight from the Age of Shadows. Among all the weapons wielded by the Vikings, few inspired as much fear as the broad-bearded axe, the famous bearded dragon. Its name came from the beard, the blade extended downwards, elongated like the chin of a savage warrior. But that shape wasn't aesthetically pleasing. She was pure strategy. A long beard allowed the Viking to grab the enemy's shield, pulling it out of defense, grab your opponent's arm, immobilizing them in seconds, hooking onto armor, unbalancing the opponent, directing strikes from below where there was less protection, and of course, apply wide and brutal cuts. It was a blade that perfectly combined technique and violence. With his beard trimmed, the warrior could easily deflect shields, create openings, and finish with horizontal blows that tore off arms, collarbones, and entire body parts. And in formation battles, like those fought by the Vikings in England, this weapon was absolutely devastating. Anglo-Saxon records describe axes that opened shields as if they were doors, and blows that split iron-reinforced timbers. But the broad-bearded axe's most deadly feature wasn't just the blade. It was in the versatility. She could kill with one blow, knock down with another, and control the fight with quick movements that left even experienced swordsmen at a disadvantage. It wasn't just a weapon of brute force. It was a tool of manipulation, a technique of psychological terror. In the hands of a trained Viking, the broad-bearded axe was as deadly as any legendary sword, and much more unpredictable. If the broad-bearded axe was the weapon of technique, the Danish Great Axe was the weapon of absolute terror. A blade so large and so thin that it seemed impossible to control. But in the right hands, it transformed Viking soldiers into living storms on the battlefield. The Great Axe was no ordinary axe. She had long cable, reaching more than 1.5 meters, wide and curved blade, perfectly balanced weight at the end, and a speed that surprised any opponent. It was essentially the two-handed sword of the Vikings. But what truly made this weapon deadly was the combination of its range and momentum. When a warrior rotated his body, using the strength of his legs, hips, and shoulders, the Great Axe accumulated enough energy to break through reinforced shields, to amputate limbs with a single blow, to knock down mounted knights, to crush helmets and destroy skulls, even through metal chains. Saxon chroniclers called these warriors the men of the high axe, and said that a single one could hold back several soldiers thanks to the devastating range of his attack. The most impressive thing? Despite its intimidating size, the Great Axe was surprisingly lightweight, forged with extremely thin blades to increase speed. This allowed for quick, almost circular cuts, transforming the weapon into a deadly arc in the air. And when used in formation, usually on the front line, it was capable of breaking through entire defenses, opening breaches, and disrupting armies that depended on cohesion and discipline. The Danish Great Axe was not a weapon of common use. It was the weapon of berserkers, elite guards, and warriors who were not afraid to be on the most dangerous front lines of battle. She did not survive the war. She decided her own path. Unlike the enormous blades used on the front lines, the throwing axe was the weapon of surprise. Portable, lightweight, and deadly, this small axe could decide a battle even before the first clash of shields. While many peoples despised throwing weapons, the Vikings elevated them to a strategic level. The throwing axe was not thrown randomly. Its blade was carefully balanced to spin precisely in the air, and its weight concentrated in the head allowed for devastating impact even at short distances. The earliest accounts describe tactics that surprised unprepared enemies. Axes thrown before the formation closed, breaking shields, throws that disarmed an opponent by hitting the arm or hand, precise blows against unprotected faces, and even launches used to create chaos in dense groups of soldiers. The sound described in Anglo-Saxon chronicles is particularly striking. The blades spin, cutting through the air, followed by a sharp impact, wood cracking, bone breaking, shield falling. The throwing axe was a simple weapon, but with profound psychological effects. Imagine facing an army while metallic objects fly towards you with enough force to penetrate shields. It was intimidating, unpredictable, and chaotic. Even worse, the Vikings used to carry several of these axes. They would send one or two forward, and when engaging in hand-to-hand combat, they still had other weapons ready to use. This versatility made the throwing axe one of the most dangerous elements of the Norse arsenal. He didn't need to kill to be decisive. It was enough to break a shield, injure a hand, knock down a soldier, or create an opening for another warrior's fatal blow. Small, fast, brutal. The throwing axe was no toy. It was the first sign that the Vikings had arrived. Although best known among the Franks, the Francisca became so effective and so feared that it was quickly adopted by Norse warriors in their incursions into Europe. This axe was not just a weapon. It was a phenomenon of war. Francisca had a unique design. Short head, curved blade with a heavy end, relatively short cable, and a design that allowed for irregular and unpredictable rotation in the air. This unpredictability was precisely what made it deadly. When easy thrown, Francisca did not follow a perfect rotation like other axes. It would fall, rise, change the axis of the blade, rotate at unexpected angles. This made any attempt at defense difficult. Chronicles from the time state that a group of warriors armed with Franciscas could break rows of shields, to destabilize compact formations, to injure soldiers even when they are protected, and to halt enemy advances before direct combat. Its impact force was so high that even when the cut didn't penetrate, the blunt force could break arms and collarbones or knock down soldiers armed in light armor. And in close combat, she remained lethal. Cracked reinforced wooden shields, it held weapons between the handle and the blade, and it allowed for quick strikes without compromising mobility. The Vikings not only used the Francisca, they refined the technique. In coastal attacks and ambushes, it was common for a shower of small, strong winds to break through the first wave of the attack, creating total confusion before the arrival of the main warriors. Francisca was chaos materialized in metal, a weapon of psychological, physical, and strategic warfare. Small enough to seem simple, but powerful enough to tip the balance of an entire battle. If there was one weapon that virtually all Vikings carried, it was the hand axe. Small, light, simple, and, paradoxically, one of the deadliest weapons of the entire Viking Age. Because the hand axe was a natural extension of the body. It didn't require extreme strength, it didn't depend on advanced techniques, and it could be used in any situation. In duels, raids, ambushes, battles in forests or inside longhouses. It was the perfect axe for anyone who needed to survive. The hand axe had three main advantages. Speed at small size allowed for quick strikes, instant changes of direction, and improvised attacks that caught any opponent off guard. Absolute control. Unlike heavy weapons, the hand axe could be used with pinpoint accuracy, ideal for targeting hands, arms, legs, and vulnerable points in armor. Efficient destruction. Despite its small size, its blade concentrated enough force to break bones, to open gaps in the armor, tear muscles, and disarm the opponent with well-placed blows. And there was something even more important. The hand axe was easy to carry. Many Vikings carried it on their side, some on their back, and others even on their belt, like a knife. It was the weapon that was always available, always ready, always reliable. In close combat, especially on ships where space was limited, the hand axe was unbeatable. He moved quickly, squeezed through gaps, and allowed for violent attacks in places where spears and large axes simply wouldn't work. And during invasions, when houses were taken by force, the hand axe became an instrument of opening, breaking down doors, tearing up wood, and knocking down obstacles. It was the everyday weapon, the weapon of war, the weapon of survival. Simple, brutal, deadly. Among all the variations of Viking axes, few were as versatile, elegant, and dangerous as the long beard axe. At first glance, it looked like an extended version of the traditional bearded axe, but don't be fooled. That long beard completely changed his fighting style. The blade's long beard served several lethal purposes. Extended reach. The lower tip of the blade reached further than most enemies expected, allowing for quick and deep diagonal strikes, controls, and retentions. The warrior could use his beard to pull out shields, to grab the opponent's arm, control the neck, or even knock down the opponent by twisting the weapon in a sudden movement. Strikes from below the defense, because the beard hung so low it could get into gaps that other blades couldn't reach, especially under round shields and light lamellar armor. But its greatest asset was its ability to blend combat and utility. The long beard axe served as both a weapon and a tool. He cut down trees, built shelters, cleared paths through dense forests, and, on the battlefield, he was a direct extension of everyday life. This familiarity increased the lethality. A Viking who spent his life wielding axes knew exactly how to distribute weight, how to rotate the blade, and how to transfer force into the blow. Anglo-Saxon and Scandinavian chronicles record long-bearded axes splitting open oak shields, tearing off arms, and decapitating enemies with unexpected, sideways impacts. And on ships, where space was limited, a long beard served as a hook to pull opponents, dominate the deck, and even restrain soldiers by their helmets or armor. The long beard axe was, above all, a weapon of total control. He placed the enemy exactly where the Viking wanted him, and then the final blow was inevitable. An axe used by men who understood that war was not just about strength, but also absolutely about technique. If the traditional bearded axe was already deadly, the Skeggöx light was its even more dangerous version, a weapon designed for speed, agility, and opportunistic attacks. It maintained the classic Viking beard shape, but with a thinner, lighter, and more responsive construction. The result? A blade that allowed movements impossible for heavier axes. The Skeggöx light was especially effective in fast-paced combat, where every second mattered. She was perfect for short and repeated attacks, quick circular blows, instantaneous changes of direction, and to catch enemies off guard through gaps in the defense. Its reduced weight allowed the warrior to switch between attack and defense effortlessly, something critical in chaotic battles, especially within villages, the corridors of longhouses, or the cramped decks of ships. But that wasn't all. The long beard maintained its tactical functionality, to hook elms, pull out shields, to destabilize opponents, and create openings for fatal blows. The Skeggöx light's distinguishing feature was the absolute control it offered over the blade. The Viking could maintain a steady pace of attacks, pressuring the opponent until an opening appeared. And when it appeared, the blow came in too fast to be blocked. Anglo-Saxon soldiers recorded that many Norse warriors seemed to dance with the axe, delivering cuts from impossible angles, as if the weapon were as light as a dagger. That was the essence of Skeggöx light, a weapon built for those who wanted more than just brute force. They wanted mobility, precision, and consistent lethality. She represented the Viking who did not rely on uncontrolled violence, but rather on refined technique and complete mastery of close combat. A weapon for those who understood that war is about speed, and whoever controls the rhythm controls death. Among all the weapons associated with the Vikings, few reveal as much about their actual fighting style as the boarding axe, the axe designed specifically for naval boarding. In a world where battles often began at sea, this weapon was as important as the ship itself. The boarding axe was not just an axe, it was a multifunctional tool capable of to board the enemy ship, cutting ropes, break oars, destroy shields, to tear planks off the vessel, and clear a path at the moment of collision between vessels. At the moment of the approach, when the ships came alongside each other, chaos ensued. Ropes tangled, spears clashed, men screamed, and the deck became a tight, deadly arena. In this scenario, long guns lost their advantage, but the boarding axe was gleaming. Its blade was short and aggressive, with a sharp point that could, to pierce helmets and light armor, to anchor into the wood to stabilize movements, pulling enemies into a state of imbalance, or simply create space between combatants. The more durable cable could withstand repeated impacts and was perfect for quick, powerful strikes at very short distances. Accounts from Frankish chroniclers describe Vikings climbing like beasts up the sides of ships, using their axes to climb, grapple, and attack simultaneously. And once on enemy deck, the weapon became all-powerful. On board ships, where every step counts, the boarding axe allowed the Viking to move aggressively, cutting from below, pushing opponents against poles, trapping them in ropes, and breaking bones with quick side strikes. It was a weapon of brutal precision, simple, direct, ruthless. More than any other axe, the boarding axe represents the spirit of the invading Viking. Adapted to the sea, prepared for chaos, and lethal the moment the enemy realizes it's too late. Few weapons represent Viking brutality, as well as the shipbreaker, a special type of heavy axe used not only for combat, but to destroy entire structures during coastal raids. It was less a delicate weapon and more an instrument of devastation, created to clear a path where no warrior should dare to pass. The shipbreaker was large, thick, and had a reinforced head capable of withstanding repeated impacts against solid doors, support beams, cabin walls, gates of coastal villages, and structural parts of enemy vessels. It functioned like a portable battering ram. While other axes were made for cutting, the shipbreaker was made for breaking. Its downward strike carried enough force to split hardwood in just a few hits. In a surprise attack, this axe could bring down an entire wall before the defenders had time to form a battle line, but he was also deadly to people. In direct combat, the shipbreaker transformed into a crushing weapon against helmets, a shield cutter, a bone-crushing agent, and a tool for absolute control, capable of pushing, unbalancing, and neutralizing opponents with heavy, wide strikes. The impact of this weapon was so violent that many native English and French shields simply crumbled with a single blow. And chroniclers describe Vikings using the shipbreaker to literally split open the enemy's flank, as if tearing the battle in two. Its purpose is simple: to turn any obstacle into ashes. If there was no opening in the defense, the shipbreaker would create one. It wasn't a fast weapon, it wasn't elegant, but in each attack he made clear the most brutal philosophy of the Nordic peoples. If there's anything standing between you and victory, knock it down. Although not the most common axe among the Vikings, the double-bitted axe became legendary for the impact it had on the battlefield. Its design with two opposing blades transformed the warrior into a constant threat, capable of attacking in any direction without needing to reposition the weapon. This axe had 3 deadly advantages. Continuous attack with 2 blades, the blow never died. If the frontal attack missed or was blocked, the weapon's return, in the reverse motion, still carried enough power to inflict deep wounds or break bones. Perfect balance, with its weight distributed across both ends. The double-bitted axe allowed for extremely fluid circular movements, ideal for chaotic battles in which the warrior needed to react to multiple enemies at once. Constant pressure. It was nearly impossible to approach someone wielding a double-bladed axe. The warriors who wielded it created a circle of death around themselves, intimidating opponents and preventing safe approach. Although not as common as bearded or hand axes, it appears in records from the late Viking Age, especially among wealthier or higher status warriors, as its manufacture was more complex. In combat, the double-bitted axe was brutal. He broke shields in 2 movements. He crushed helmets with reverse kicks, disarmed enemies by trapping their weapons between the blades, and allowed for almost unpredictable attacks from the flanks. For Saxon and Celtic defenders, facing a warrior with this weapon was like fighting a wheel of blades. Every miscalculation cost blood, flesh, or life. Although not all, Vikings carried one. Those who did became centers of destruction, clearing a path for their troops and instilling terror long before the final blow was struck. The double-bitted axe was more than just a weapon. It was a warning. Whoever was in front wouldn't survive the impact. While many Viking axes were made for speed or balance, the hewing axe existed for a single purpose: to penetrate deep into flesh, wood, and even light protection with a precise strike. He was the axe of heavy, controlled blows, one that didn't need many movements to devastate an enemy. The hewing axe's blade was wider at the bottom and slightly angled forward, creating an extremely aggressive point of impact. This curvature was designed to increase vertical penetration power, making the axe to pierce shields more easily, break ribs and collarbones, to cause long and deep cuts, and open breaches large enough to instantly incapacitate an enemy. It was the type of weapon where a single well-placed blow could decide the battle. Unlike the Danish Great Axe, the hewing axe did not require a large space to be used. This made it perfect for battles in forests, invasions of villages, battles inside longhouses, and limited naval battles. The strength of the hewing axe came from its shape and economy of movement. The warrior didn't need to spin his entire body to generate impact. The front weight itself was already doing the job. Saxon chronicles describe axes of this type as splitting, shields to the hilt, and causing wounds impossible to close, making them especially feared by soldiers who relied on light armor. For a Viking, the hewing axe represented the ideal balance between practicality and brutality. It could be used with moderate force, but the result was always disproportionately destructive. It was the weapon of the final blow, of efficient execution, and of direct force without waste. If great axe was spectacle, hewing axe was the sentence. Among all the axes used by the Vikings, few inspired as much apprehension as the splitting axe. Originally designed for splitting thick logs and hardwood, it was heavy, thick, and built to generate concentrated force. And in the hands of a northern warrior, that weight transformed into pure destruction. The splitting axe lacked the elegance of a Skeggöx and the speed of a light axe, but that didn't matter. It existed for a simple purpose: to divide whatever was in front of it, and it worked exceptionally well. Its broad, deeply angled head had 3 devastating effects. Overwhelming impact. Even when the wire didn't penetrate, the blow was strong enough to crush bones through light armor and deform helmets made of thinner metal. Cracks that brought down defenses, wooden shields split in half like poorly dried logs. A single blow created enormous openings, exposing the arms, torsos, and faces of enemies. Inability to block directly, any attempt to block the splitting axe with a sword or smaller weapon resulted in fractures, disarming, or the immediate destruction of the protection. This axe was especially feared in battles against peoples who relied on rigid, defensive formations. When the splitting axe went into action, no shield wall could last long. Despite its weight, experienced warriors knew how to handle it with impressive efficiency. They used their entire bodies, from legs to torso, to deliver blows that, according to Anglo-Saxon accounts, could tear a man in two with the right force. And when used in attacks on coastal villages, the splitting axe became both a tool and a weapon at the same time, opening doors, knocking down columns, breaking locks, and throwing enemies to the ground with the sheer force of the impact. It wasn't the fastest weapon, not even the most sophisticated one, but she was one of the most feared, because when a splitting axe went down, something had to give. While many Viking axes were versatile, the broad cleaver had a very specific function: to destroy shields. It was the terror of any defensive formation. a weapon built to tear through reinforced wood and dismantle the protection that kept soldiers alive in the chaos of battle. The broad cleaver's blade was wide, heavy, and angled, with a slightly curved edge to maximize the impact area. Its design resembled a combination of an axe and a cleaver, only scaled for war. The effect of this on the battlefield was brutal. When a Viking struck a shield with a broad cleaver, three things happened almost simultaneously. The wood split into large splinters. Anglo-Saxon shields made of glued and reinforced planks simply could not withstand the impact. The arm of the person holding the shield absorbed all the impact. This often caused dislocations, fractures, or momentary loss of strength, leaving the enemy vulnerable to the next blow. The shield opened, creating a window of death, a perfect opening for the second strike, usually a side cut or a downward strike to the collarbone or neck. The broad cleaver also had a front weight that allowed for devastating side attacks, capable of pushing opponents back or knocking them to the ground. And because its surface area was so large, it could hold shields, pull them aside, and leave warriors exposed. This axe was especially feared during raids, when defensive shield formations were the main barrier between the Vikings and the inhabitants of coastal villages. A warrior with a broad cleaver could literally break through the enemy line single-handedly. It wasn't a fast weapon, and it required strength and control, but when used correctly, it was a death sentence for any defender who depended on the protection of wood. The broad cleaver didn't just attack. He broke through, destroyed, and opened paths where no one expected to survive. A weapon that didn't allow any defense to stand for very long. Among all the variations of Viking axes, few balanced attack, control, and versatility, as well as the backspike axe. Its appearance said it all. A sharp front blade, and at the rear, a metal spike designed to pierce, tear, and even rip away armor. It was the type of axe created for situations where the enemy was still standing after the initial impact, because the second blow, coming from the opposite side, would hardly leave any chance of survival. The backspike axe's lethality stemmed from its dual function, cutting stroke by the front blade. Like any good Viking axe, the main blade was capable of splitting shields, cutting bones, and creating deep gashes in the opponent's body. Brutal perforation through the rear spike. The spike was narrow, rigid, and incredibly strong. He could penetrate helmets made of thinner metal, lamellar armor, reinforced leather protectors, ribs, and even compacted wood. In battles against Anglo-Saxon and Frankish warriors whose defenses evolved over time, this type of weapon made a significant difference. When the blade couldn't cut, the spike would pierce, like a spear, creating holes and tearing off entire plates. Versatility also shone in close combat. If the warrior became cornered, he did not need to reposition his weapon. A short movement with the spike was enough to incapacitate the enemy. And there was yet another terrifying function: pulling and unbalancing. The spike could get tangled. Belts, strings, shoulder pads, broken shields, or even the opponent's own helmet. A quick tug would bring the opponent to their knees, providing a perfect target for the fatal blow. The backspike axe was, essentially, a weapon for warriors who liked to dominate close combat, not just destroy, but control the suffering of the enemy, blow after blow. A brutal, intelligent, and feared tool. While many Viking axes were made for cutting, the war pick axe existed to do something completely different: extreme piercing. Its shape resembled a fusion of a war hammer and an axe, and its main function was simple and terrifying: to penetrate where nothing else could. In an era when armor was rapidly evolving, the Vikings knew that it wouldn't always be possible to slice an enemy in half with a single blade strike. Against more stringent protections, such as reinforced helmets, dense mesh quotas, smaller metal plates, hardened bony protections, a blade could fail. But not a war pickaxe. The tip of the war pickaxe was narrow, heavy, and incredibly durable. When a Viking activated it at full power, it could, to pass through iron, helmets, to pierce the skull, to crush the collarbone, to drill deep holes in the armor, and cause injuries so concentrated that they were virtually impossible to survive. The impact of warpick didn't need to be widespread, he needed to be precise. That is why this weapon was so feared among more experienced warriors. In battles against armored rivals, it was the type of weapon that could decide the contest with a single well-placed blow. And unlike broad axes, the war pick worked extremely well in tight spaces. On ships, in longhouses, in narrow corridors, and even in ambushes, it allowed for short, quick, and devastating blows without requiring much room to move. Furthermore, the opposite side of the pickaxe often featured a small blade or hammer, making it even more versatile. A single weapon with two lethal functions. If the blade wouldn't clear a path, the spike would. If the spike didn't knock it down, the hammer would crush it. It was the weapon of pragmatic warriors, those who knew that in the chaos of war, efficiency always trumps aesthetics. The war pickaxe wouldn't cut. She was breaking down, and when it broke, nothing was left standing. Among all the weapons the Vikings brought to the battlefield, few had a name as intimidating as the shield biter, and the name was no exaggeration. This axe was designed to do exactly that. Tear chunks out of reinforced wood as if it were chewing bones. The shield biter wasn't too big or too heavy. The secret lay in the angle of the blade and the way the edge advanced toward impact. The curved edge penetrated shields quickly and deeply, as if the wood simply gave way without resistance. Unlike broad cutting axes, the shield biter functioned in a more surgical manner. First blow, it entered the shield, breaking through the wood fibers and creating an irregular opening. Second blow, the blade gripped, allowing the shield to be pulled down or to the side, completely unbalancing the opponent. Third blow, the fatal attack, now without the protective shield, almost always struck the collarbone, neck, or side of the torso. The name shield biter appears in Norse sagas with a mixture of respect and fear. It was a weapon associated with warriors who knew how to manipulate the enemy's defenses and turn them to their own advantage. Another deadly detail was his speed. Because it is lighter than a splitting axe, for example, the shield biter could be used repeatedly in sequence, one strike to open, another to lock, another to finish. This rapid pace surprised Saxon soldiers accustomed to heavy, slow axes. And in line battles, where shields formed the first barrier between life and death, the shield biter was a constant threat. He destroyed what held the formation together. And once the shield fell, the warrior fell along with him. The weapon gained a reputation as one of the most efficient at breaking through human defenses, not because of its immense strength, but because of its technical mastery of chaos. If there was an axe capable of striking pure terror into the hearts of enemies, it was the skull splitter, a type of heavy, short, and aggressive blade, created specifically for brutal vertical strikes. His name is not poetic, it's literal. The function of this weapon is simple. Come down from above and split the enemy in two, starting with the skull. The skull splitter's head was thicker than that of other Viking axes, with a reinforcement just behind the blade to allow the energy of the blow to be transferred with devastating precision. The Viking didn't need to aim for weak points. Anywhere on the top of the head, shoulders, or collarbone was enough to create wounds that were impossible to survive. Anglo-Saxon chroniclers describe shocking scenes involving axes of this type. Helmets sinking as if they were clay pots, skull bones shattering on initial impact, entire shoulders buckling under the force, and soldiers falling before they even realized the fatal blow. The skull splitter was especially deadly in chaotic battles when the confusion allowed for quick vertical attacks, from top to bottom, leaving no time to defend. The thick blade prevented it from becoming excessively stuck, allowing the warrior to lift the axe and attack again in a few seconds. Using it, however, required strength and control. It wasn't a weapon for just any Viking. It was often associated with the most robust men, warriors who fought on the front lines, clearing a path through brute force. His role was clear: to take down the most protected ones, to break heads, destroy elms, to break through the enemy line on initial impact. And when a skull splitter descended, no shield or prayer could save its target. The name survived because its function was unmistakable: to destroy that which kept the enemy alive. An axe created for the final, definitive, and irreversible blow. Among the most intimidating axes in the Viking arsenal, few had as menacing a presence as the Iron Maw axe, a wide, deep, and reinforced axe whose blade literally resembled an open metal mouth, ready to devour shields, limbs, and armor. Its design was different from the common standard. The blade was more curved, with a pronounced opening in the center and lateral reinforcements that increased its resistance during violent impacts. The goal was not just to cut, but to bite deeply, to lock onto flesh or wood, and to create enormous gashes in the target. The Iron Maw axe functioned in a particularly destructive manner in 3 phases. The initial impact. The broad blade struck with frontal force, tearing chunks of wood from reinforced shields or shattering laminated leather protections. The bite. The blade's curvature allowed it to lock onto the target, pulling the enemy's shield, arm, or even armor closer to the Viking. This move completely destabilized the opponent. The tear. With the force of the pull, the blade tore through wood, fabric, and flesh simultaneously, creating large and deep wounds, far more destructive than clean cuts from thinner weapons. The Iron Maw axe was especially effective against combatants who relied on shields, as its design turned defense into a deadly trap. In attempting to block the blow, the warrior offered his own shield to be bitten and torn off. Furthermore, this weapon was perfect for battles on uneven terrain. The bite and pull movement worked very well in forests, villages, and rocky shores where the Viking could take down an enemy without needing to make large movements. Despite their heavy appearance, many Iron Maw axes had well-distributed weight, allowing experienced warriors to alternate between wide strikes and control movements with surprising fluidity. It was a weapon of total dominance over enemy defenses, an axe designed to turn the opponent's shield into their downfall. When the iron mouth closed, there was little left to tell the story. Among the most formidable warriors of the Viking Age were those who wielded the cleaving long axe, a weapon that combined deadly reach with absolutely devastating cutting ability. It wasn't just an elongated version of a regular axe. It was a tool created to tear through structures, break through formations, and dismantle any defense that dared to stand in its way. The cleaving long axe had 2 essential characteristics: an extremely long cable, reaching almost 2 meters in length in some cases. The shaft allowed the warrior to attack from beyond the reach of swords and short spears. This transformed the user into a threat capable of killing even from a controlled distance, without directly exposing themselves. An elongated and heavy blade, the narrow shape at the beginning and wider shape near the edge, acted as a natural lever, giving the blow impressive force. Each attack carried enough energy to snatch shields from the hands of enemies, to penetrate light armor, breaking bones with a side impact, and even to knock down knights or mounted men. But the true brutality of the cleaving long axe lay in its tearing power. A poorly blocked blow could shatter the shield and continue walking through the enemy's defense, tearing through clothing, skin, and muscle in a single continuous motion. Chronicles recount Saxon and Norman warriors describing the weapon as a wind of blades. Such was the width and force of its circular blows. And, contrary to what their size might suggest, many experienced warriors knew how to perfectly control their pace. A wide-ranging attack to break through the enemy line, followed by shorter, more precise movements to finish off opponents at close range. The cleaving long axe was a weapon of territorial destruction, designed to clear space, break through formations, and dictate the flow of battle. In duels or ambushes, she was intimidating. In large-scale battles, it was decisive. An axe that did more than just kill. He reshaped the fight with every blow. Among the most legendary axes of the Viking Age, none carried as much of a mythical aura as the Godsplit Axe. An axe so brutal, so heavy, and so destructive that it gained an almost supernatural reputation among Norse warriors. His name was no mere boast. For many, it was a weapon that separated destiny from flesh, as if it had been forged to decide who would live and who would fall forever. The Godsplit Axe was no ordinary weapon. It demanded exceptional strength, meticulous technique, and absolute courage. Its massive head and reinforced handle made each attack an event, a blow that could completely alter the course of a battle. 3 characteristics define this legendary weapon: crushing weight, calibrated for total destruction. The Godsplit didn't cut smoothly. It crushed, broke, shattered, and ripped open deep fissures. Reinforced shields were destroyed in a single impact. The helmets were irreversibly deformed, and even protected bodies could not withstand. Concentrated power. Expanded impact area. Its blade was wide and slightly curved, designed to transfer energy in a devastating way. A blow from the Godsplit could cut through flesh, bone, and wood in a single continuous motion. Mythology and psychological horror. Reputation was part of the weapon. Warriors who wielded the Godsplit were seen as forces of nature, men who walked carrying the weight of the gods themselves. Chronicles tell of enemies who retreated at the sight of the blade's glint, fearing to be split in two like firewood. The Godsplit Axe was rarely used by ordinary combatants. It was reserved for berserkers, clan champions, and warriors whose presence on the battlefield needed to command respect even before combat began. When that weapon came down, it wasn't just a blow. It was the end, a sentence that determined who would survive that day. And so we conclude the list of the 20 most lethal Viking axes ever forged, the pure essence of Norse brutality in its fiercest form. If you've made it to the last axe, you're now part of the brotherhood that seeks the truth behind the steel, the war, and the legends. Here at Blades and Shadows, every blade tells a story. Support our journey. Subscribe to the channel. Leave a like to support our work. Comment which axe you found most brutal. Share the video with someone who loves historical weapons. More myths, more cutting truths await you. Because in the shadows, steel always speaks louder,